The year is 1150 AD. In the small English village of Woolpit, time is measured not by kings or wars, but by the turning of the seasons and the chime of distant abbey bells. This patch of East Anglia, named for the deep trenches dug long ago to trap wolves, is a world unto itself, isolated, self-sufficient, and bound by ancient rhythms. Autumn has settled over the land, golden and quiet. The harvest is gathered, and the rich, black soil lies turned in heavy furrows, resting under a mild sun. Life here is hard, a constant negotiation with the land, but it is also blessedly known. The village is a cluster of humble huts around a stone church, all under the authority of the powerful Abbey of Bury St. Edmunds. This feudal system, while restrictive, provides a rigid, comforting structure. The boundaries of Woolpit are clear. The forest, the river, and the abbey's reach. Nothing comes from beyond these boundaries that the villagers are not prepared for. One man who understands these boundaries better than most is Brother Nicholas, a clerk from the abbey sent to manage the harvest accounts. He is an outsider, a man of letters, viewing the peasant life with a scholar's detached curiosity. He is stationed at the local manorial hall, occupied by Sir Richard de Calne, the knight who oversees the lands. Sir Richard is a practical man, a soldier turned landowner. His philosophy is written in the strength of his arm and the sharpness of his axe. He respects the abbey's power, but his true devotion is to the steady rhythm of the land. The soil is sweet this year, Nicholas de Calne had grunted that morning. The Lord's mercy is plain upon the fields. Let us pray it holds. Nicholas merely nodded, counting bushels in his mind. Sweet soil, indeed, he thought, but the peace of this land is an illusion, held in place by the fear of the wolf pit and the strength of the church. He knew the quiet of Woolpit was a hard-won stasis, easily broken. England had only just dragged itself out of a brutal civil war, a time men grimly called the Anarchy. For nearly 20 years, the country had torn itself apart. Loyalty shifted like sand, and every traveller was a potential foe. The air still hummed with the memory of violence. The most unsettling feature of the landscape was the very pit that gave the village its name. It was an old, deep trench near the edge of the harvest field, a relic from a time when the threat was wild beast, not wild men. It was seldom used now, half hidden by thorns and brush, a dark scar on the face of the earth. It was to this very spot, at the end of that unseasonably warm harvest day, that the field hands were drawn, not by the howl of a trapped animal, but by a sound far more chilling and unplaceable, a desperate, keening babble, seeming to rise from the earth itself. The peaceful, familiar world of Woolpit was poised on the edge of the unknown, about to be breached by a mystery that would defy every explanation known to the 12th century. The fields lay fallow, waiting. The true centre of power in this corner of Suffolk was not the small hall in Woolpit, but the towering Abbey of Bury St. Edmunds, and the measure of that power rested with Abbot Hugh II, a man the villagers knew only as a distant, severe presence. The abbey was a fortress of faith and knowledge, with a vast library where history was not just made, but recorded and judged. The abbey's shadow stretched far, long after the sun had set. The story of Woolpit's strange event would eventually be judged by men like Abbot Hugh, but it would first be filtered through the eyes of Brother Nicholas. As an educated clerk, Nicholas was trained to document reality with the rigorous scrutiny of the church. He carried the post-anarchy mindset in his solar deep, ingrained wariness that saw deception and chaos lurking behind every unexplained event. The recent civil war had taught England one bitter lesson: nothing was what it seemed. A friendly face could hide a bandit's heart, a safe road could conceal an ambush. Trust was a currency that had lost all its value. For men like Nicholas, now tasked with rebuilding society under the new peace of King Henry II, this meant skepticism was a virtue. Strangeness was often a synonym for danger. So when the field hands, pale and wide-eyed, stumbled into the manorial hall, their fear was palpable. They dragged Brother Nicholas from his ledger and interrupted Sir Richard de Calne's supper. But Nicholas's first reaction was not terror. It was cynicism. He had heard tales of trickery and deceit his whole life. Vagrants might use strange noises to lure people into an ambush. Or perhaps it was a prank by village youths, a foolish jest that had gotten out of hand. Maybe it was something more sinister, a heretical ritual being performed in secret, or even a demon sent to test the faith of the good people of Woolpit. A simple explanation, he thought, was always the most likely. Bandits, rebels, heretics. These were the real monsters of his world, not creatures from a fairy tale. But Sir Richard de Calne, a man of action, had no time for such theories. He grabbed a heavy torch and his sword. Enough speculation, Nicholas, he bellowed. Words won't solve this. Let's go and see what devilry is afoot. With a small group of brave, or perhaps just curious, villagers, they headed out into the twilight. As they approached the old wolf pit, the sound grew clearer. It was not the cry of an animal. It was a high-pitched, distressed chattering, like to voices speaking a language no one had ever heard. It was filled with a desperate, human-like sorrow. The villagers hung back, their torches flickering, casting long, dancing shadows. Sir Richard, ever the soldier, pushed forward, peering over the edge of the pit. Nicholas followed, his skepticism beginning to waver, replaced by a cold knot of dread. What he saw in the pit defied all reason, all logic, all the known boundaries of his world. There, huddled at the bottom of the deep trench, were two children, a boy and a girl. They were dressed in strange, unfamiliar clothes, woven from a material none of them recognized. But that was not the most shocking part. In the flickering torchlight, their skin was not pale or tanned from the sun. It was, impossibly, the color of fresh green leaves. The children looked up, their eyes wide with terror. They shrank back from the light, their strange, babbling speech turning into terrified sobs. The villagers gasped. Crosses were made. Whispers of fair folk, changelings, and demons spread through the crowd like wildfire. Sir Richard stood frozen for a moment, his sword hand slack at his side. Even he, a man who had faced the horrors of war, was stunned into silence. Brother Nicholas felt the world shift beneath his feet. The neat columns of his ledger, the predictable cycle of the seasons, the solid authority of the church, all of it suddenly felt fragile. The anarchy had broken the laws of men, but what had just climbed out of that pit seemed to break the very laws of God and nature. The mystery of the green children. In the 12th century, in the small English village of Woolpit, life was governed by the sun, the soil, and the church. This was a world of tangible realities, the heavy weight of a farming tool, the comforting smell of wood smoke, the taste of hard cider, and the solid, indisputable heat of the sun directly overhead. The people of Woolpit lived an entirely earthbound existence, bound to the predictable, physical rules of their time. Everything was hard, but everything was explainable. If a child fell ill, it was God's will or the devil's work. If the harvest failed, it was bad weather or bad luck. The boundaries of the possible were clear. Just an hour before the world changed, the village was running like clockwork. Elara, a young mother, was kneading dough by her hearth, her mind on the thin stew she'd make for her husband, Thomas. Her world was contained within the for-waterland daub walls of her home. The idea of people with skin the color of spring leaves was an impossibility, a thought that couldn't even form in her practical mind. Outside, the air was filled with the rhythmic thunk of Osbert the cooper hammering hoops onto a barrel. He was grumbling about the shortage of good oak, a practical problem for his practical mind. He saw the world in shades of wood grain and the tightness of a seal. His life was a series of known variables: rain, wood, water, and customers. The possibility of a true, unclassifiable anomaly was as alien to him as a ship sailing through the clouds. This predictable rhythm was shattered when a peasant named Thomas came stumbling into the village, his hands shaking, his voice a stammer. He was talking about a sound, a strange sound, coming from the old wolf pit on the edge of the common land. A beast? Asked Nicholas, the abbey's chronicler, a man of letters and logic, pushing his rare spectacles up his nose. A wolf, then, or a vagrant seeking shelter? No, brother, Thomas insisted. Not a man, not a beast. The sound is wrong. Sir Richard de Calne, the local knight and a man of action, had no time for riddles. Enough babbling, he declared, grabbing his wooden cudgel. I will see what devilry this is. Nicholas, stay here. This is a matter for muscle, not manuscript. But Nicholas, driven by his duty as a chronicler and a flicker of forbidden curiosity, insisted on following. I must document any breach of the king's peace, Sir Richard, if it is a vagrant. His identity must be recorded. If it is something else, the abbey must know. As they hurried toward the infamous pit, Nicholas's mind raced, constructing rational explanations. A lost traveller from the continent, speaking French perhaps? A child, abandoned by beggars and driven mad by hunger. The peasant's story of a keening babble. That was wrong was exactly the kind of exaggeration he'd come to expect. The people of Woolpit were pious but deeply superstitious. A sudden noise from an old wolf trap could easily spiral into fears of the supernatural. Nicholas saw himself as the anchor of reality. He carried a small wax tablet and stylus, the tools of civilization, intending to take precise notes on the unfortunate person or animal he fully expected to find. Even so, Richard was preoccupied with earthly concerns. As they neared the edge of the common land, he muttered, "If it is a beast, I will dispatch it quickly. We have no time for distractions. The abbey demands the accounting finished by St. Michael's Day." His words captured the entire community's focus, duty, practicality, and the relentless ticking of the abbey's clock. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that distorted the familiar landscape, turning the fields a bruised purple. The pit itself was a mundane hole, a 20-foot deep depression in the ground dug generations ago. It was a physical, local thing, a reminder of known dangers. It was a trap, a dead end, the very opposite of a gateway to another world. And yet, as they reached the lip of the pit, the entire ordinary, earthbound world of Woolpit collapsed. The frantic, high-pitched sounds coming from below were not English, not French, not Latin. It was a language with no recognizable structure, a sound that, as Thomas had so terrifyingly assessed, was simply wrong. But it was the sight that followed that shattered every known rule of their existence. As Sir Richard peered down, he recoiled with a sharp, involuntary gasp. Nicholas, leaning in beside him, saw them. Two figures, a small girl and an even smaller boy, were clinging to the roots at the crumbling edge of the pit. They were gaunt, terrified, and their skin from the soles of their feet to the roots of their matted hair was not the ruddy bronze of a peasant or the pale pink of a noble. It was a vibrant, unnerving shade of deep, shimmering green. Nicholas's stylus slipped from his numb fingers, falling silently into the rich, fallow earth. His educated, cautious mind, prepared for thieves or beggars, was violently unprepared for the impossible. His skepticism was faced not with deception, but with an enigma that defied every natural law he had so painstakingly studied. The rational, controlling light of their world now shone down onto beings who seemed to belong to a world that light could not reach in that single, shocking instant. The ordinary life of Woolpit, the kneading of dough, the making of barrels, the careful accounting of grain ceased to be the central truth. A profound, inexplicable mystery had taken its place. The hard, practical world of 12th century England had been breached, and it would never be able to fully shake off the unsettling, luminous residue of their arrival. What happened next to these strange green children, and the questions they brought with them, would echo through the centuries, becoming one of history's most enduring and baffling legends. The old wolf pit was just a scar in the earth, a dark line in the late afternoon sun. Sir Richard D. Calne peered into its shadow, cudgel in hand, ready for a fight. But what he saw wasn't a beast or a desperate man. Down in the pit, clinging to a tangle of roots, were two children. They weren't dressed in the rough rags of the local poor. Their tunics were made of a strange, tightly woven material, dyed an impossibly deep, unearthly emerald green that seemed to drink the twilight. But it was their skin that silenced the crowd. The boy, small and shivering, was the color of moss after a spring rain. The girl, a little older and protectively in front of him, was a vibrant, shocking jade. This wasn't a stain or dirt or sickness. The color radiated from within them, giving them a luminous, alien quality that made the air feel thin and cold. Brother Nicholas, the village chronicler, scrambled forward. His logical mind, trained to observe and record, just stalled. He wildly searched for a medical reason, an excess of bile. But no illness he knew could turn human flesh the color of a stained glass window. The children were crying, a high-pitched, musical sound that had the rhythm of language, but none of the words They speak no known tongue, Nicholas whispered. So Richard, a man of action, recovered first. Green or not, they are children starved and injured. We can't leave them here, to freeze. He started barking orders. A long hemp rope was fetched. A stout farmer, Thomas, tied it around his waist and prepared to be lowered down. The other peasants watched, a mix of terror and pity on their faces. The recent civil war, the anarchy, had hardened them, but the sight of the helpless creatures touched something deep inside. The descent was clumsy. Dust showered down on the terrified children. When Thomas reached the bottom, they recoiled against the damp earth. Their eyes, wide with fear, held a strange innocence. They weren't wild, they were just other. Thomas, with surprising gentleness, spoke softly. "Come, children, up to the light." The girl didn't understand his words, but she understood his tone. She shielded the smaller boy, who was now weeping silently. After a long moment, she made a decision. She pushed the boy into Thomas's open arms, then let the rope be tied around her. The ascent was slow, agonizing, and watched in absolute silence. When the boy was hauled over the edge of the pit, the crowd instinctively stepped back. He was impossibly green, fragile and silent. Then came the girl. She was placed beside him and immediately began clutching at him, babbling in that strange language, her eyes darting from face to face in pure panic. Brother Nicholas knelt, forcing himself to breathe. He reached out and touched the boy's skin. It was cool, like polished stone. Close up, the green had an iridescent shimmer as if a light were trapped just beneath the surface. So Richard took charge. "They're faint. They're shivering. Alara, get them to the hall. Quickly. We need warmth and food." Alara, a baker and a mother, overcame her fear. She lifted the boy, who weighed almost nothing, and bundled him in her apron. The girl immediately grabbed her skirt, eyes locked on the woman's face. As they were led away, the remaining villagers stared into the pit. It was just a hole, dark, empty, and ordinary. It was a wolf trap on manorial land. It wasn't a passage to another world, but they had seen what came out of it. They knew the world as they understood it had just been broken. The silence that fell over Woolpit that night was heavy with one question. From what unimaginable, underground place had these emerald children come? The manorial hall, usually a place of simple comfort, was now a chamber of surreal quiet. The children were brought to the warmest room near the kitchen hearth, but the warmth of the fire seemed powerless against the unnatural chill that came from them. Under the flickering rush lamps, their green color was horrifyingly clear. It wasn't the pale shade of sickness, it was a living, intense emerald, like moss on ancient iron. Their veins were invisible, lost beneath the pigment. Brother Nicholas, now armed with his quill and parchment, documented everything. His Latin script was agitated. To children, body the color of summer, leaves, eyes large and sad, not like ours, clothes of unknown material. It seems as if they came from another world. He was fighting his fear with his education, but the superstition of the peasants was spreading like wildfire. The villagers clustered in the doorway, too afraid to enter. They muttered prayers and made the sign of the cross. To the medieval mind, everything had a source, holy or demonic. If the children were from God, they were a warning, a sign of famine or the return of chaos. If they were from the devil, which was the more immediate fear, they were changelings. Green was the color of the fairy folk, the Fae, who stole Christian souls. Their unknown language sounded like the cursed babbling of spirits. Alara, the woman who had carried the boy, was now convinced. "They are Fae, Sir Richard," she whispered, trembling. "They are changelings. They will sicken our livestock and turn our milk sour." Osbert, the cooper, clutched a crucifix. "They are a curse, a trespass from the realm of the unchristian. They must be taken to the abbey to be exorcised." So Richard tried to calm the rising hysteria. "They are starving. They are flesh and blood." He gently took the girl's wrist. "See, they bleed red, I'd warrant." But the terror was self-sustaining. The recent trauma of civil war had left everyone on edge. Any break in the natural order felt like a sign of collapse. The children, sensing the shift from pity to revulsion, curled together. This only made the villagers more afraid. They brought food bread soaked in ale, mutton broth, but the children pushed it all away, their faces twisted in disgust. This sealed their fate in the eyes of the peasants. They do not eat our food. They do not speak our language. Their skin is the color of a plant, not a person. They are not of our kind. The mystery of the green children had arrived, and with it, a profound fear that would haunt the village of Woolpit for years to come. Nicholas watched this cultural crisis with grim fascination. He understood the peasants weren't heartless. They were simply defending their fragile, ordered world against a phenomenon that threatened to tear their reality apart. His initial attempt to find a rational cause was drowned out by a rising tide of medieval superstition. He knew that if this panic wasn't contained, the children's lives would be forfeit to an angry, fearful mob seeking to restore the natural order with fire and prayer. As the long night wore on, fear crystallized into a single, terrifying question whispered through the shadows of the hall. How do we send them back? To the dark place from whence they came? The people of Woolpit, simple and deeply religious, saw not a puzzle to be solved, but a great, green, living evil that must be purged. The first 3 days within the security of Sir Richard D. Calne-S Hall were a period of intense, shared anxiety, a kind of siege laid by the unknown. The green children, whom the knight had temporarily named Viridis and Viridia, meaning green boy and green girl, were alive, but just barely. They huddled together, the girl fiercely protective of the frail boy, and their presence acted as a constant, humming chord of dread throughout the household. The most immediate, life-threatening puzzle was their absolute refusal to eat. Every single staple of the 12th century English diet was offered to them: coarse bread, simmered mutton broth, goat's milk warmed by the fire, even sweetened honey water. All were met with identical expressions of nausea and terror. The food of the Christian world seemed poisonous to them, which, to the superstitious peasants, only confirmed the growing certainty that the children were from the Fey realm, surviving on stolen souls or air. Brother Nicholas, observing this, grew desperate. He understood that without food, his enigma would soon be a tragedy, and his priceless chronicle would end before the first true clue was uncovered. He tried exotic solutions: berries from the forest, raw fish from the river, even a handful of crushed barley, believing their diet might be utterly primitive. They refused it all, turning their distinctive green faces away. They are starving themselves to death, Nicholas. Sir Richard thundered on the third morning, his face red with frustration. The villagers are ready to burn them out as demons, and I cannot fault them if they perish under my own roof. Nicholas, his scholarly pride stung, was observing the girl, Viridia. She was the stronger of the two, her attention less fixed on fear and more on the strange new world around her. It was she who unwittingly provided the first physical clue. A servant, carrying a basket of recently shelled broad beans, carelessly spilled a handful onto the floor. Viridia's head snapped up. For the first time since their arrival, her large, sad eyes showed not terror, but a flicker of profound recognition, followed instantly by a ravenous, desperate hunger. Before anyone could stop her, she scrambled forward, dropped to her knees, and began to devour the raw, cold beans directly from the dirty floor, stuffing them into her mouth with frantic, gasping intensity. The boy, seeing his sister eat, quickly joined her. The effect on the watching crowd was immediate and complex. Nicholas felt a surge of triumph. A key, physiological boundary had been crossed. They were not spirits, for spirits do not eat raw legumes. Sir Richard felt immense relief. They were salvageable, but the peasants were repelled. Raw beans, the food of pigs and paupers, their extreme, starved consumption of it only reinforced their otherness. The second impenetrable wall was their language. Every effort was made to communicate. Nicholas, using his abbey training, tried the 3 languages known to 12th century literacy. First, Latin, the universal language of the Church. Quis estis vos? Unvenestis? Who are you? Where do you come from? The children stared blankly. Next, Norman French, the language of the ruling class. They offered no response. And finally, Saxon English, the local dialect. They appeared terrified by the harsh, guttural sounds. The children's own speech was the single most disturbing element. It was a high, piping, melodic chattering filled with long, flowing vowel sounds. It sounded strangely musical, almost like a bird's song or the wind passing through reeds. Nicholas spent hours trying to map the sounds, believing if he found a pattern, he could find the root. He tried to teach them simple words: fire, water, sun, bread. They could only repeat the sounds back as garbled, musical approximations. It is not human language, Sir Richard, Nicholas concluded one evening, exhausted. It has no structure. It belongs to no known earthly tongue. This lack of language was, paradoxically, the most terrifying clue for the peasants. They knew the story of the Tower of Babel, where God punished humanity by scrambling their language into 1,000 different tongues. But the children's speech was not one of those 1,000. It suggested an origin outside of God's established curse. If the children were not subject to God's punishment, were they even within God's grace? The peasants saw only confirmation of their deepest fear. Creatures that ate raw beans and chattered like spirits were an attack on the very order of creation. The girl, Viridia, began to gain strength on her diet of broad beans. She started to display a spark of intelligence, pointing at objects and making her high-pitched requests. But the boy, Viridis, remained stubbornly frail. The green hue, though slightly less vibrant, clung to their skin like a tenacious curse. The puzzle was no longer just where they came from, but how to teach them the basic, defining elements of humanity, the taste of bread, and the sound of a Christian word. The arrival of the green children was now a recognized theological and geographical crisis. Sir Richard, overwhelmed, dispatched a messenger to the great abbey of Bury St. Edmunds. The abbey's response was immediate and severe. They did not send soldiers but scholars and priests. This was a battle for the soul and sanity of the region. The event had to be controlled and explained. Leading the delegation was Father Benedict, a stern and learned man. His approach was the interrogation of silence, the belief that all secrets, given enough pressure, will eventually reveal their source. The interrogation began not with torture, but with linguistic battery. The abbey's logic was simple: all of mankind descended from Adam and Eve. So, all languages must have a common root. They just needed to find it. Day after day, the two green children were subjected to a dizzying barrage of sound. Father Benedict began with Latin, declaiming passages from Scripture. In principio erat verbum, in the beginning was the Word. The children only winced at the deep tones. Next came the various trade languages of Europe: Castilian, Germanic dialects, Welsh, Breton, even ancient Gaelic. Nicholas watched as Father Benedict's face grew grim. Each known tongue failed. The repeated failure suggested one of two terrifying possibilities. Either their tongue was a completely independent evolutionary failure, or worse, it was not human language at all. The grammar is entirely musical, Brother Nicholas Benedict hissed one afternoon, his patience frayed. It is entirely reliant on pitch and speed, not on syntax. They are mimicking the sound, not the meaning. This is the speech of birds, or perhaps devils trying to confuse us. The villagers took the failure of the holy men as a confirmation of the supernatural. If the abbey could not command a response, then the children were truly agents of chaos. Their silence under interrogation was seen not as fear, but as cunning. A final, desperate attempt was made to seek a geographical source. Nicholas drew maps on parchment, pointing to the coast, to France, to Rome, and the Holy Land. Viridia watched the lines, her bright green eyes following the movements. Then, in a moment that sent a shockwave through the room, she reached out and snatched the stylus. She didn't draw, but she pointed to an area on the map that was simply blank: the vast, uncharted space beyond the edges of the known world. An area marked only with decorative sea monsters, and the words terra incognita. She spoke her strange musical phrase, gesturing downward, toward the very floor, as if to indicate a land not across the sea, but beneath the earth. Father Benedict's face went white. "This is a deception," he declared, snatching the parchment back. "The devil is using the child to mock our knowledge and suggest places where Goddess light does not shine." The interrogation of silence had yielded no truth, but it had solidified a terrifying premise: these children came from a place unmapped, unknown, and almost certainly unholy. They had sought a source in the physical world and found a door to a metaphysical one. The communication efforts were abandoned, leaving the children still clothed in their green skin, their strange clothes, and their absolute alien silence. The scholars and clergy had failed, and now the fragile process of assimilation forcing the children to become English. Christian subjects was the only recourse left. Surviving in a new world was a slow, painful surrender for the children of Woolpit. After the abbey scholars failed to understand their strange language and the children struggled to find food they could eat, their care fell to people, Sir Richard, who gave them a home, and Alara, the baker's wife, who gave them a mother's touch. Alara was a patient woman, shaped by a life of routine, while the learned men debated about unknown lands and divine signs. She just saw to starving children. She ignored the villagers' whispers of fairies and the priest's ominous silence. She started calling the girl Agnes, a common English name, as if to pull her from the world of magic and into their own. The boy, who they called Viridus, remained weak and often shivered with cold. He barely ate the raw broad beans, unlike his sister, who had a fierce will to live. It was Agnes who first showed signs of adapting. The change from raw beans to cooked food was a careful, weeks-long process led by Alara's gentle cunning. She started by mashing raw beans with warm water. Day by day, she added tiny, almost invisible new things, a drop of butter, a pinch of salt. Driven by a constant, gnawing hunger, Agnes accepted these small changes. But the real breakthrough came by accident. One cold afternoon, a chronicler named Brother Nicholas was in the kitchen, watching the children with a keen eye. Agnes, now stronger, was playing near the hearth. Alara was making a simple stew of peas and lentils. A little bit of the stew, thick with cooked green peas, bubbled over and splattered on the floor. As Alara rushed to clean it up, Agnes noticed the spill. The color was a bright green, the same color as her own skin. She pointed and chattered in her musical language. She wasn't disgusted. Instead, she dipped a finger into the cooling puddle of stew and tasted it. Nicholas watched, holding his breath. Agnes's face showed a mix of surprise, curiosity, and an intense need. She immediately pointed to the cauldron, begging in her unknown tongue for more of the cooked peas. The fast was broken. This was more than just eating. Agnes had accepted fire. She had eaten food changed by cooking, the very thing that separated humans from animals. From that day on, her diet expanded. She ate soft cooked peas, lentil porridge, and eventually, bread soaked in water. The results were stunning. As Agnes's body absorbed the new nutrients, the shocking green of her skin began to fade. This proved Nicholas's theory. Their difference was physical, not demonic. The bright green became dull, then patchy, and finally, over several weeks, it disappeared completely, leaving her with the pale complexion of an English child. For the villagers, this was a miracle. The terror they felt began to dissolve. The men who had been ready to chase the children away now looked at Agnes with awe. She was no longer a fairy sprite, but a reclaimed soul, living proof of the power of Christian food and English care. The disappearance of the color meant the curse was gone. Brother Nicholas documented every detail, noting the date she first ate cooked food as carefully as he recorded the manner's fine ounces. The paling of her skin was proof that the unknown world had been physically driven from her body. But this miracle was tragically one-sided. While Agnes thrived, growing stronger and more curious, the boy, Viridus, only grew weaker. He refused all cooked food, clinging to his raw beans and his green skin. Without proper nutrients, his vibrant emerald hue turned into a sickly, pale chartreuse, the color of stagnant water. He wasn't just refusing English food, he was refusing to assimilate. He was the unyielding mystery, the one part of the puzzle that wouldn't fit. His frailty and his fading green skin became a constant, sad contrast to his sister's hopeful transformation. Agnes, her skin now the color of linen, had crossed a vast, invisible bridge. She had literally shed her old world. Eating the cooked peas wasn't just breaking a fast, it was breaking her tie to her mysterious home. She had accepted the sun and soil of Woolpit. Her recovery was a victory of the known over the unknown, and it paved the way for the next crucial step, learning to speak. The true story wasn't in the grand pronouncements of the priest, but in the quiet observations of Brother Nicholas. The greatest mystery wasn't their language or clothes, but the color of their skin, and now, its disappearance. Nicholas didn't see the fading green as a miracle, but as a vital clue. It was a physical process he could study. The change began subtly, right after Agnes started eating cooked lentils and peas. The skin's initial, striking emerald glow started to dull. It softened to a muted jade, then began to break into earthy bronze patches around her elbows, knees, and palms. Nicholas charted this transformation on a scroll, comparing the shades to local dyes. He wrote, "The green is fading from the periphery inwards, receding fastest where the skin is thinnest. It is not sloughing off, but seems to be absorbed or replaced from within." For the villagers, the loss of the green was a true exorcism. The color was the sign of their fairy origin. As Agnes's face began to look like any other English child's, the fear in the village vanished. "The saintly Alara has saved her soul," one man declared. "The devil's hue is departing. She is ours now." The villagers, once afraid, started treating her with the cautious kindness they'd show any lost child. But the transformation deeply unsettled Nicholas. It was too fast for a natural change. He theorized the green pigment came from something in their diet, a mineral unique to their homeland. This substance was now being purged from her blood by the completely different English food. The implication was huge. Their home world was fundamentally different. It wasn't just another country, it was a different ecology, one that marked the very flesh of its people. To survive here, their bodies had to radically rebuild themselves from the inside out. This victory, however, was overshadowed by the escalating tragedy of the boy, Viridis. His green pigment also faded, but for him, it was a sign of decline, not recovery. Because he ate almost nothing but a few raw beans, his body was starved of nutrients. His skin didn't turn a healthy bronze like his sister's. It turned a sickly, translucent yellow-green, the color of wilting grass. It was a visible sign of his internal protest against this new world. The boy was failing to adapt. His skin, once a vibrant marker of his unique home, was now a pale, dying testament to his inability to live under this sun. The very things that sustained the English cooked grains, meat, dairy were like poison to his delicate, alien body. Agnes had survived by becoming one of them, but Viridis was fading away, a tragic reminder of the mysterious world they had left behind. The horror of the situation was dawning on brother Nicholas. It wasn't just sickness, the boy was actively, physically rejecting this world. While his sister, Agnes, was recovering, her strange green hue receding like a slow tide, the boy was doing the opposite. He grew weaker, his body refusing the very transformation that was saving his sister. His eyes, perpetually wide and feverish, were fixed on the floor, as if trying to stare his way back through the pit they'd crawled out of. The boy's painful, stubborn resistance ignited a new fear in the community. Agnes was their miracle, proof of God's power to save. But the boy, he was becoming proof of the devil's power to resist. His sickly skin was the last seal of that alien world they came from, and its fading color was just the life draining out of him. The sight of the two children together was a powerful, unsettling sermon. There was Agnes, almost entirely human in complexion now, playing near the hearth. And then there was the boy, still stubbornly green, skeletal, and coughing weakly on his bench. For Agnes, the physical transformation was almost complete. She was being captured by the known world, saved. But for the boy, losing that vibrant green color was the same as losing his life. The very pigment that had made them so terrifying was now disappearing. But the real mystery where they came from, and the profound fragility of their nature remained. The slow fading of the green was just a gruesome prelude to a deeper, more irreversible loss. While the village of Woolpit celebrated Agnes's recovery, her bright eyes, her fading green skin, and her first attempts to copy English sounds, the boy, whom they'd started calling Viridis, became a silent, ever-present shadow. His decline wasn't a sudden catastrophe. It was a slow, inexorable sinking, a quiet refusal to anchor himself in this strange new land. He remained bound to his single, insufficient food source, raw broad beans, and even those he ate with decreasing frequency. The meager nourishment couldn't sustain his small frame, which was now racked by a persistent, rattling cough. His once vibrant green skin had faded to a jaundiced, sickly yellow-green, a color that screamed of deep, internal distress. That pigment, the very thing that had defined him, was just the first thing his body surrendered in its losing battle. For brother Nicholas, watching this was a professional agony. The boy wasn't just a failing subject, he was the key, the repository of the complete secret. Agnes was getting stronger, yes, but she was adapting. She was forgetting her past even as she gained her future. But the boy, he held fast to his origin through his refusal to change. He was the purest, most direct link to their ST, Martin's land, and that link was slowly, tragically dissolving. Nicholas spent hours by the boy's simple cot near the fire, a desperate, silent plea in his eyes. He would point to Agnes, now laughing as she played with a cat, a sound almost recognizable as an English chuckle. Then he'd point back to the boy, silently urging him, begging him to follow his sister's path. But the boy would only turn his head away, his feverish gaze lost in the shadows of the room. When he did make a sound, it was only in their own language, the tongue of Babel, now reduced to a low, melodic whine. It was a sound of profound, unrelenting sorrow, a lament for a lost world, a light he could no longer see. This physical decline started to fuel a new, more refined kind of fear among the learned men. For so Richard D. Calne, the fear was political. If the boy died under his care, the abbey would question his stewardship. The villagers might see it as a dark judgment on their entire community. For Nicholas, the fear was intellectual. The boy was his only chance to understand the children's cosmology. If he died, the why of the green skin, the where of their sunless home, it would all be permanently sealed within a corpse. The mystery would remain an enigma, never becoming a documented truth. Nicholas tried what few medical treatments he knew. He brought herbal remedies to quell the fever and strong poultices to ease the cough. Nothing worked. The boy was suffering from a condition Nicholas couldn't name, with a physiology he couldn't comprehend. It was as if his very internal chemistry was rejecting the atmosphere, the food, even the gravity of this world. One twilight, as the boy struggled for each breath, Nicholas dared to bring Agnes close. He hoped her successful assimilation might somehow transfer to her brother. Agnes, now more comfortable and confident in her new world, spoke to him. She used a mixture of their musical tongue and the few English words she'd started to learn. "Come to eat," she murmured, holding out a piece of cooked lentil paste. With an incredible effort, the boy managed to lift his hand and push the food away. His wide, sad eyes communicated something deeper than hunger or fear. It was a profound homesickness, an unwavering loyalty to the world he had lost. His physical body was sacrificing itself to preserve the sanctity of his memory. The boy's increasing frailty became a form of passive resistance. He carried the entire, unspoken history of St. Martin's land within him, and he was choosing to take that weight, that secret, into the grave rather than exchange it for the bread and language of the English. His breathing grew shallower. The high, musical lament of his tongue faded into an occasional, soft whistle. The final, agonizing irony was that the creature who had terrified the villagers with his exotic nature wouldn't die from malice or violence. He was dying from the simple, grinding incompatibility of two different worlds. He wasn't killed by a sword or a disease. He was being killed by the air, the light, and the food of 12th century England. The realization settled over Nicholas like a shroud. They would never know the boy's truth. He would die carrying the complete story of their origin, leaving behind only Agnes, whose own transformation meant her memories would soon be unreliable, tainted by her new life. The last flicker of green light was fading from Viridis's skin. The weight of his secret was becoming too heavy for his small body to bear, signaling the inevitable, heartbreaking end to their most complete link to the Emerald Enigma. The day after Agnes first spoke, confirming their origin as the subterranean St. Martin's land, a heavy silence filled the hall. Her fantastic story, though filled with the simple logic of a child, had answered the where but only deepened the how and the why. Brother Nicholas was frantically trying to piece together a coherent report for the abbey, struggling to document a geographical reality that included a soft blue light and an eternal twilight. But even these dizzying revelations were quickly overshadowed by the tragedy that followed. The boy, Viridis, was gone. His death wasn't unexpected, given his refusal of this world's nourishment, but its finality was devastating. He had succumbed in the cold, grey dawn, taking with him the full, uncorrupted knowledge of his home. His body, now entirely pale and frail, was quietly interred in the unconsecrated earth near the pit, the very breach through which he had entered this alien world. Agnes, the survivor, was now utterly alone. Her grief was a palpable, physical presence. She stopped speaking the simple English words she had just learned, retreating into a profound silence that was harder to penetrate than their original language barrier. She would sit by the hearth, her gaze fixed on the empty space where her brother's cot had been, tracing meaningless patterns on the floor with a piece of charcoal. One evening, Sir Richard de Calne found her sitting there. He approached her not with the formality of a knight, but with the rough sympathy of a man who understood loss. He tried to coax her to eat the soft bread his wife Alara had prepared. "You must eat, Agnes," he urged gently. "Your brother would want you to be strong." Agnes looked up. Her eyes, now dark and wide in her pale face, held an intensity that was far beyond her years. And then she spoke, not in the melodic chatter of her old tongue, but in slow, clear, perfectly formed English. Her voice was tight with sorrow. "We promised," she whispered. "Promised what, child?" Sir Richard knelt beside her. "We promised we would return," she said, "when the sound of the great bell came again. We would go back to the light that is soft." This was it, the unkept promise, the final, tragic secret the boy had carried with him to his grave. A pact between two children to follow the bell back through the tunnel to their twilight home. Viridis had kept his faith by dying, by refusing to fully embrace the world that had trapped them. But Agnes, having eaten the bread and shed the green, was now too heavy, too rooted in this world to ever fulfill that vow. She was the one who survived, but in doing so, she had broken their promise. She was here to stay, forever haunted by the memory of a home she could never return to, and a brother she had left behind. The English winter descended, harsh and unforgiving. The fields of Woolpit were locked under a hard, crystalline frost, and the world seemed to mirror the cold, unyielding fate of the green child. The boy, Viridis, had been declining for months. His relentless, quiet struggle against this new world reached its inevitable conclusion in the small, unguarded hours before dawn. He slipped away from the world of the meridian sun with a gentle, final sigh, a sound barely distinguishable from the shifting of the wind outside the manorial hall. His passing wasn't marked by a sudden seizure or a feverish delirium, but by a simple, profound exhaustion. His tiny body, having spent months fighting the food, the light, and the very air of this earth, had finally surrendered. As he passed, the last of the sickly yellow-green pigment abandoned his skin, leaving him a pallid, waxen white, the color of untouched parchment. It was the final, devastating proof that his otherness wasn't a supernatural gift but a physiological condition. His life required a specific, sunless ecology to survive. In this world, the loss of his green color was synonymous with the loss of his life. Brother Nicholas, who had kept a constant vigil beside the boy's cot, recorded the moment of death with a heavy heart. His stylus scratched furiously against the parchment, desperate to capture the final detail. He wrote in Latin, "The green boy returned his soul to God," and all his secret went with him. The death of Viridis was a tragic, climactic moment. It instantly sealed the most important part of the mystery forever. The boy had been the pure, uncorrupted vessel of their home, the terra incognita. He had refused to assimilate, and in doing so, he had taken the final, unspoken truths with him into the unyielding silence of the grave. The scholars, the priests, and the chronicler had all failed. They couldn't extract the whole story before he escaped them entirely. His sister, Agnes, now almost entirely pale and physically stronger, was the first to realize his fate. She didn't weep with the loud, familiar cries of an English child. Instead, she sat beside his cold body, rocking slowly, her small hands clutching his. She began to emit a low, continuous, and hauntingly beautiful lament in her native tongue, a sound of pure, untranslatable sorrow, both musical and utterly desolate. It was a farewell hymn, sung in the language of a world they could never see again. Sir Richard de Calne, ever the practical man, arranged for the boy's disposal swiftly. He was fearful of polluting the sacred churchyard with a being that had resisted a Christian life and diet. So, he ordered the body buried in the unconsecrated ground near the pit, the very breach through which the children had entered this world. The boy was returned to the earth, but not to the sacred earth of the Christian parish. He was an outsider in life, and he would remain an outsider in death. It was this profound, final act of separation that broke Agnes's emotional and linguistic dam. The day after the burial, she was quiet and withdrawn, refusing even her beloved cooked peas. Alara, the kind woman of the house, sat with her, patiently using the slow, simple words of the household. She pointed to a bucket of water. "Water," she said. Agnes repeated a musical approximation. Alara pointed to the sunless winter sky. Sky. Then, overwhelmed by her own grief, Alara said softly, "Your brother. He is gone. You must let him go, child." Agnes looked up, her eyes wide and dark in her pale face. The intense grief forced the words of her new language to break free from her sorrow. Her voice was hoarse and thick, like a rusted hinge finally giving way. "We promised," she whispered. Sir Richard, who was supervising the cleaning of the room, froze. Brother Nicholas's quill scratched to a stop. "Promised what, child?" Sir Richard knelt beside her. "We promised we would return," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "When the sound of the great bell came again, we would go back to the light that is soft." This was the final, heartbreaking revelation. It wasn't a random wandering. It was a failed pilgrimage. There was an unkept promise, a pact between the two siblings to follow the sound of the bell, the same sound that had led them into the pit back through the tunnel to their twilight home. Viridis had kept his faith by dying. His body had sacrificed itself to ensure he would never be lost to the bright, loud, suffocating meridian sun. Agnes, having eaten the bread and shed her green skin, was now too heavy, too rooted in this world to fulfill that vow. Her first full, sorrowful sentences in English served as the climactic revelation. They were not spirits, or foreigners, but travelers who had stepped into the light, and only one of them had survived the transition. Her speech was the last, desperate outpouring of her old identity before it was entirely submerged. She spoke of her brother's constant fear of the sun's heat and the noise of the English dialect, which he found too sharp. She revealed that they had feared the villagers would force them to follow the noisy, burning yellow light forever. His resistance, his frail body's rejection of this world, was his way of honoring their pact. Agnes's words served as the closing chapter on her brother's story, and the opening page of her own. With his death, the Green children were no more. Only one remained, a pale English girl named Agnes, burdened with a fantastical memory of a sunless realm that existed somewhere below the silent fields of Woolpit. The secret was fully revealed, but its primary witness was silenced. The story of the Green children now passed from the realm of physical mystery into the enduring realm of history and legend, carried solely on the tenuous, heartbreaking memory of a girl who had once been green. The seasons turned, cycling through the harshness of winter and the eventual promise of spring. 5 years passed. The memory of the Green children began to transition from a terrifying reality to a village legend, a local tale told mostly to frightened, disobedient children. Agnes was no longer the subject of fear, but a quiet, accepted member of the community. She was now a girl of perhaps 11 years, pale-skinned and slight, indistinguishable from any other peasant girl raised on the hard, honest fare of Suffolk. Her assimilation was complete, a definitive victory for the meridian sun and the English way of life. She had become a daughter of Woolpit. She was raised in the manorial hall under the watchful eye of Sir Richard and the gentle care of Alara. She wore the rough wool and linen of the English peasantry. She spoke the local East Anglian dialect perfectly. Her original, musical tongue was completely forgotten or perhaps simply buried too deep for retrieval. Agnes learned the duties of a good English girl: churning butter, carding wool, tending the vegetable patch, and, most importantly, kneeling dutifully at the Church of St. Mary. She had been formally baptized and instructed in the Christian faith. Her fantastical origins were subsumed entirely beneath the official narrative of the church. She was a lost, heathen soul rescued by the grace of God and the charity of the manor. Brother Nicholas, now an aging man, remained her most diligent observer. He watched her daily life, always searching for a residual clue, a fragment of memory that might confirm the truth of St. Martin's land. But Agnes showed no signs of her past. She ate the heavy black bread and thick mutton stew without complaint, utterly at ease with the tastes that had killed her brother. Her eyes, once terrified by the sun, now squinted at the bright light with the natural tolerance of any other field worker. The only subtle hint Nicholas noted was a persistent, almost unnatural aversion to green clothing. It was a silent refusal to wear the color of her lost identity. Yet, despite this flawless assimilation, Agnes could never truly shed the aura of difference. The full, impossible truth, held by the brother and articulated by the sister, hung in the air of Woolpit, even if only as a whispered story. The story was sealed, but it was not forgotten. It lived on, a fantastic tale that the world would struggle to believe, preserved forever in the enduring ink of history, and the heartbreaking memory of a girl who had once been green. The villagers of Woolpit accepted Agnes, but they never quite forgot her emerald hue. They saw her quiet nature not as shyness, but as the lingering silence of the Fae. Her quick skills were whispered to be a Fae blessing. When she stared off into the distance, they believed she was listening to echoes from the tunnels or the unearthly chimes of the great bell that had summoned her. But her own memories were the final, unstable frontier. Years later, when her husband Nicholas gently asked her about the sunless realm, her answers were fragmented, contradictory. The place below, she'd say, her brow furrowed. It was dark, like a cellar dot, and cold. The once poetic description of soft, blue light and a ringing bell had dissolved into simple, mundane words. 5 years of Christian instruction and English routine had papered over the fantastic cosmology. She de-revealed in her moment of grief. She had become an unreliable witness to her own past. Nicholas knew the true secret was perfectly sealed by two opposing forces: the boy's death, which preserved the truth through silence, and the girl's survival, which corrupted it through adaptation. Agnes had escaped the physical bondage of her home only to be caught in the psychological bondage of another. She grew up to be a sober, pious young woman, married a local miller's son, and bore children who were entirely, undeniably English. She was a daughter of Woolpit in every measurable way. But whenever children played near the old, weed-choked wolf pit, villagers would watch Agnes, remembering. They saw in her a walking miracle, proof that even the most bizarre trespassers could be folded into the sacred routines of 12th century life. Her life was the resolution of the physical mystery, but her silence was the affirmation of the intellectual enigma. Agnes was living proof that the sunless realm was real, but also the guarantee that its secrets would remain locked away forever. The year is now 1160 AD. A decade has passed since the two green children emerged. Brother Nicholas sits in the scriptorium of the Abbey of Bury St. Edmunds, his hands trembling. He's no longer a young, cynical clerk, but a respected, aging scholar. His final task, to compose the definitive entry on the green children. For the Abbey's official chronicle, he's gathered all the facts: the green hue, the robin diet, the death of the boy, the fantastic testimony of Agnes and her complete assimilation. Now, he faces the ultimate choice: how to categorize the impossible. The Abbey demands a rational explanation. Nicholas, the skeptical chronicler, has 3 choices, each with its own terrible consequence. His first choice, madness, a natural explanation. This was the theory favored by academics. The children weren't from another world, but were simply lost peasants. Their green color was the result of a severe illness from malnutrition, known as chlorosis or green sickness, caused by an extreme iron deficiency. Their recovery on a nutrient-rich diet supported this. The boy died because he was too weak. The girl's story of a sunless realm was just the delirium of a starving, terrified child. To choose this path, Nicholas would satisfy the Abbey's need for order, but he'd have to deliberately ignore the most compelling facts: their foreign clothes, their unique musical language, and the detailed, consistent nature of Agnes's initial testimony. To choose madness was to commit a lie of convenience, sacrificing truth for credibility. His second choice, misdirection, a theological explanation. This was the one whispered by priests and feared by the peasants. The children were agents of the devil, or the Fae. Their appearance from a hole in the ground was a classic pattern of demonic trespass. The green color was the mark of the other. The boy died because his demonic spirit failed when exposed to Christian air and food. Agnes survived because she was either miraculously redeemed by God's grace or, more darkly, she was a long-term plant an agent of misdirection meant to sow fear. Her story was an elaborate lie. This choice legitimized the villagers' terror and served the church's narrative of constant spiritual warfare. But Nicholas couldn't reconcile this with the reality of the children. They were frail. They bled. They starved. If they were demons, why would they be defeated by a simple meal? To choose misdirection was to deny observable facts in favor of superstition. His third choice, a hidden world, the scholar's burden. This was the terrifying, unbelievable conclusion his own meticulous notes supported. But it risked his reputation and the abbey's authority. The theory, the children's account of the sunless realm, was literally true. They had traveled from a physical, subterranean, or parallel world. The pit was an accidental, temporary gateway between two realities. The boy died because his body couldn't adjust to the atmosphere, the light, or the diet of our world. To choose a hidden world was to admit that the abbey's maps were incomplete, its knowledge finite, and that reality itself was for stranger than the church claimed. It was an intellectual act of heresy. It was the only choice that truly honored his observations, but it would condemn his work as legend, not history. Decades bled into centuries. The manorial hall crumbled. Sir Richard D. Calne and Brother Nicholas became dust. The chronicle, with its strange Latin entry, was sealed deep within the abbey's archives. Woolpit returned to its quiet normalcy. Agnes died an old woman, surrounded by English grandchildren, taking her fragmented memories with her. The villagers even filled in the wolf pit, as if to bury the terrifying possibility that their solid, ordered world was merely a thin crust over a vast, unknown realm. But the mystery simply transferred from the physical scar on the land to a psychological scar on the community. The story of the Green Children became their defining local legend, recited at hearths on dark winter nights. With every retelling, the story changed. The children grew taller, their green hue brighter, the sunless land more terrifyingly beautiful. The enduring power of the Woolpit mystery is its defiance of all earthly logic. Every attempt to categorize it failed. Logic failed. If they were just sick, why the unique language and aversion to sunlight? Theology failed. If they were demons, why could they be cured by simple food and grieve for their lost home? Geography failed. If they were from a hidden world, where was the door? Why did it never open again? The story left behind a lasting question, not just for the villagers, but for all of us who encounter Nicholas's faded script. The question isn't just what they were, but what the incident implies about the nature of reality itself. Woolpit is a quiet testament to the uncomfortable truth that some enigmas defy absolute explanation. It's a hole in the fabric of the known world, proving that human knowledge, even when supported by authority and rigor, is inherently incomplete. The Emerald Enigma remains so powerful because it forces us to confront the same impossible choice faced by Brother Nicholas. In the conflict between the evidence of your eyes and the limits of your understanding, which do you trust? Do you choose the comfort of a rational but incomplete explanation, or the unsettling truth of an impossible event? The physical well was filled, the green was faded, and the language was forgotten. But the echo of their rival, the haunting possibility of a hidden world just a step away beneath the fallow fields, remains the true, eternal legacy of Woolpit. The answer is still waiting, somewhere in the silence. Thanks for watching.